Yeah, so yeah, we read. Most of us read ARARAT. We're a few people short. A couple of them had to beg out at the last minute, unfortunately. But
No problem.
thanks for showing up anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
And we're going to be seeing you again up in the Merrimack Halloween Book Festival.
Yeah, it's going to be a hell of a day, actually. And I'm the cover for the Twisted Book of Shadows today, so that was pretty cool.
I saw that. Yeah, so that's coming out about the same time, or I don't know what the date is.
Yeah, that and Hex Life, which I've got right here, is
oh yeah, it's Sarah Lang's
that day.
I saw that. I saw you're also the participant in the Pixel Project charity.
Yeah, I've been working with them for the last couple of years anyway.
That's great. I've been following them yearly. I just saw James Moore on interview last night that he did.
Yeah.
Apparently he was not a big fan of the sad puppies.
Apparently what? Sorry?
Apparently he wasn't a big fan of the sad puppies. That was
oh right.
A pretty big surprise.
Why was that a surprise?
I don't know anybody who is. But
yeah. Well, Jim makes his opinions known pretty loudly. So
he was emphatic. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, thanks for doing the Merrimack Valley Festival. That's an amazing event. Three of us have gone to it a couple times, and we love it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a blast. I mean, it really is for so many people, it's sort of like the highlight of the year because everybody is in such a good mood that day. You know, I mean, I think that it's a combination of just, you know, the authors are happy because they're selling books, and everyone else is happy because they didn't have to pay to get in. You know, you just walk in and everybody's there. And,
yeah. Actually, that's where I got my copy of ARARAT last year.
There you go.
I got my signed copy at Pandemonium.
Cool. Yeah. I still miss the old location, the Harvard Square location. You know, I go back actually to when I was in college at Tufts. Pandemonium was run by this guy named Spike, who was the owner before Tyler, and it was like upstairs on the second floor of a building in Harvard Square in this tiny little space. And then when Tyler bought it, he moved it into the garage in Harvard Square. But yeah, that was a long time ago.
Now, they do good work there, promoting local authors, especially.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. They've always been great.
Just before my time. So, as far as ARARAT goes, so I was wondering about sort of what your. So, what was the process that went into? It's kind of a generic question, but what the process that went into researching and writing and just coming up with the idea for that?
So I had a lot of times what happens is I'll come across an article that is interesting to me, or an item, or I've circled something in a book or something. And in researching something else, I had found this article about archaeologists, people who believe Noah's Ark exists and are spending their lives essentially looking for it.
Wow.
Right.
And it was pretty fascinating, this article. And I printed it up and I had it on my desk for probably 5 or 6 years. And I was just sort of thinking about what I wanted to do to follow up Snowblind. And I've had this idea for a long time. And then I thought, what could I do with Noah's Ark that would be interesting? And I don't know. It's just one of those things, as a writer, that's where you get your ideas. And sometimes you have a point to a dream I had or a specific moment. But this is just, the article was there and I was trying to think of something to do after Snowblind. And I have a file that has all kinds of sort of thoughts and sometimes a line, maybe like an opening line or something in there. and I also have these articles, and I was sort of looking through various things, and I saw that one, and I went, and I just sat, as soon as I came up with the idea that the coffin inside the ark, that was it. I mean, I had almost the whole thing right.
That was a fantastic idea, if I may. That he captured a demon.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, whenever you come up with these sort of what if ideas, because story ideas are always, well, what if this happened?
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like you need to sort of take it to that next step. What if this happened and then? Right? So that kind of is where ARARAT comes from.
That's great. So, I mean, how much? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of research that went into this book.
Yeah, that one did take a lot of research. I mean, I tracked down a guy who actually leads climbs on Mount Ararat.
Oh wow!
He or I should say, he leads climbs, and he has led climbs on Mount Ararat. So I was able to get a lot of firsthand information from him. And I also do research about culture and about food and about I never pretend to be an expert, but I find if you sprinkle a few things in, you can fool people enough. And I was interviewed by a couple of different national newspapers in Turkey when ARARAT came out, because it was published there. And both of the journalists who interviewed me thought I spent time in Turkey.
Yeah.
So I figured that if they were convinced, then I did my job.
Right. That's great.
Unfortunately, the current Ben Walker novel that I'm writing right now takes place in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a much easier location.
That's Red Hands?
Yeah, Red Hands takes place in New Hampshire. Yeah.
Okay, that's a whole different questions, like how we go from basically 2 novels in the Middle East back to New Hampshire.
Well, I think that was the reason. I think that 2 novels in the Middle East, I was like, well, I need to get him home. Also, I assume you haven't read the Pandora Room yet.
I've read the Pandora Room. I just finished the last week, I think. And
right, so I don't want to spoil anything for anybody.
Right, and he does.
Suffice to say, he's
I'm
in
going
a
to
little
spoil
trouble.
the fact that Ben Walker survives the Pandora Room.
Yeah, and that's not a surprise, but also he's in a little trouble at the end of the Pandora Room.
That's true.
So he's sort of in a timeout when we return to him at the beginning of Red Hands. So.
Okay. All right.
Makes sense. Okay.
So what is? I don't know if you can give us like just as a sidebar, just kind of like just a general idea what the Red Hands is about.
I haven't really been talking about it because I'm in that stage that I've gone through with each one of these novels where I fucking hate it.
Yeah.
And also you're taping this, so so it's going to be available on YouTube. I guess what I would say is that it has what I think is the best opening of any book I've ever written.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I read it out loud to my wife the day that I wrote it, and she agreed.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
So now the question is, can I make the rest of the book not suck? But that is the problem that I run into with all of these, is I get to this and I hate it at this point. But now I usually get about halfway through, and then I go back and I start revising it and reworking it and getting it to the point where I'm happy with it, and then I can finish it.
Is that about where you are now?
Probably more than halfway, but I've gone back and I'm sort of juggling rewriting the first half while continuing on with the second half. which is just as simple as it sounds.
And I know you had a contest to write someone into your book, into Red Hands. And have you written them in yet?
Yes and no, in the sense that there are 3 people that I've actually sort of tuckerized in this book, including the winner of that contest. But that doesn't mean, like, I may, as I go through, find that one character would be like one of the person who won that contest is a guy named Justin Jones. And Justin has been one of my most dedicated readers for years.
Oh wow!
And so I was happy that he won that. But it also means that I want, if I come up with a way to kill him, I will. So right now, what I've got him doing is sort of boring, and it's a small sort of cameo, kind of boring. But if I find a way to include him in a way that would be, where he could die horribly.
Right, of course. You owe that to him.
I do. I feel like I do. I mean, that's a badge of honor, I think.
Yeah, of course.
I've been very nobly eviscerated.
Everyone wants to be a red shirt.
Exactly.
Actually, there's one I guess element to ARARAT that I'm curious about. One of the reviews that I read about it suggested that there might actually not be a supernatural element involved.
It is.
Which is curious. I mean, but I was kind of like, I could kind of see that up until later in the book, whether or not people are just like driving themselves crazy, thinking about what this thing in the coffin could be. And I didn't know if there was like a version of this in your mind that was more like that, more sort of like a Paul Tremblay, is it or is it not supernatural kind of version of that.
Well, I mean, my idea there is that I hesitate to use the word sophisticated, but there is a level of sophistication in the sense that I'm writing about characters who either believe one thing. Let's just say I'm writing about characters whose beliefs are called into question by the things that they're experiencing. Some of them are people of faith, and some of them are people who are atheists, and some of them are just don't know what they believe. But all of them experience some sense of uneasiness as their sort of belief system is upended over the course of the story. And I think that the same is true of the reader. So you come into this and be reading it thinking, I don't think there's anything supernatural in this story at all. I think or you can be the kind of person who comes to it and reading it thinking, this is definitely. But sure.
Right.
So just like the characters, the reader can't be sure what my intentions are until you get to the point where it's very clear.
Right.
And I think, the last third of the book is pretty fucking clear.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of doubt at that point. But I did certainly appreciate that the more ambiguous part of the book that where people were discussing whether or not. I remember there's one part where Ben Walker is almost sort of not enthusiastic, but he's sort of like hopeful of if it is a demon, then what that would entail for the rest of epistemology as far as how to interpret the rest of creation in that case. And I think he probably lives to regret thinking that. But he's but yeah, I mean that's that. I think that's that. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, if you see a supernatural element that is the worst possible kind, that also suggests that the best possible kind is possible,
Right.
if not, demonstrated as being real. So, and that's true. I mean, I think you see a lot with people who don't believe in ghosts, but would welcome the idea of ghosts if they actually.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm an agnostic, but I would love to see a ghost. I was just having this conversation with my friend Kat Scully the other night. She's telling me about her personal experiences in which she is convinced that she has been in the presence of a ghost twice in her life. And those are her stories to tell, but that's, and a photograph that looks like a photograph of a ghost that I took, but of the camera, but I don't believe in ghosts, but I really would like to. I would love to see one experience. And I've said, there's a recording somewhere of the first ever interview I gave on radio for my first novel back in 1994. Wow. I said the same thing in 1994, which is, I think that one of the things that this kind of storytelling does for us is while you're reading it, even though you know it's fiction, if just for a minute you have that heightened sense of reality and you could believe that demons exist, and in that same moment you also believe that there must be some kind of higher intelligence, some kind of angel or counterpoint to it. And I don't think any of that, but I would like to.
Right.
Yeah, and that kind of opens up the floodgates as far as what's been, what you've been taught about the supernatural from people that presumably know the whole pantheon of, the whole realm of possibilities as far as what the supernatural entails. So if you see one element of it that reminds you of one part of it, then that would kind of like lead you to believe that the rest of what you've been taught about what's possible is true.
Right.
Yeah, this goes back. One of the greatest works in Western literature is Hamlet. And one core interpretation of Hamlet is when Hamlet sees the ghost of his father, it opens up a whole world to him. The reason why he's dithered so much and can't decide whether to do something or not is partly because heaven and hell are now real possibilities to him because of that damn ghost.
Right.
Which kind of blows everybody his mind, and it takes you inside the mind of someone who's directly experiencing, more moral issues at a more real level than he's ever had in his life.
Right.
So
well, again, you can say the same thing about A Christmas Carol. Are you but a piece of undigested beef, right? And that is the story of Scrooge is, here's a guy who never believed in anything except the dollar or the pound, and yet he ends up in this scenario where he's forced not only to believe in the soul, but to consider the ramifications of his actions.
Right.
Now, did you talk to any biblical scholars when you were writing this book and seeing their take on such things, or I would guess that the real biblical scholars got to stay away from the ark chasers that you describe in your article.
Yeah. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. So no, I didn't talk to any biblical scholars. I'm certainly not a, I don't believe in any of it. When I say I'm an agnostic, that only means to me that I believe that there are things that we do not yet understand. And I believe that it's folly and arrogance to think that you're the smartest thing in the universe. So I think there's something out there, but I don't think that any religion has any claim on definition about what it might be.
Right. Yeah. Yes, and until it's demonstrated, so I would say.
Right.
So one other sort of tangential question I have is about in ARARAT and the Pandora Room. Ben Walker refers to an earlier sort of defining experience where his team is wiped out. I'm just I'm wondering whether or not that is going to sort of remain to be sort of a backstory thing they'll bring up from time to time in the future books, or actually that'll be fully fleshed out at some point.
At the moment, I don't have any plans to tell that story. However, people who are interested in that story can go read my novel, The Ocean Dark, which is set in the same world, and which we'll find out. And basically, some of the characters from The Ocean Dark show up in Red Hands and are a more direct part of Walker's world going forward. And if the TV series that I'm writing right now happens, they're also a TV series.
Oh, wow.
And all I can say is that the events that Walker's referring to is a mental sequel to The Ocean Dark.
Okay, gotcha.
So in my head, there's a sequel to The Ocean Dark, starring Walker, that encompasses those events, but I don't know if I'll ever write it.
Gotcha. And when you bring that up, that's so there is a. Last time I checked, there was an article I saw in February that was saying that was AGC. They bought the television rights and were interested in making a TV. Yeah, right. And we're interested in making or developing a TV
Oh, wow.
Is that ongoing, or?
So I've written the pilot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
you were writing it.
Yeah, no, I've written the pilot. I'm executive producing, and as of this conversation, I think that the director chair. But that said,
yeah, well, they had a director was the what's that?
No, there was no director listed in the.
Okay, I must have been thinking of something else.
So basically, we're at the stage now where once that is firmed up, I'll be working on the Bible and preparing the pitch, and then presumably in about 4 to 6 weeks, I'll be in LA. Services and other premium cable and networks, whatever.
Right. Pulling for that. That's
yeah. So keep your fingers crossed.
Yes, definitely.
I will say that if it gets made, that the pilot, as written, I'm sure it'll change quite a bit, but as written, the pilot could have been its own standalone Walker novel.
Okay, so is not the pilot, is that not based on ARARAT or the Pandora Room, or?
So again, it's impossible to say what the thing will evolve into if it goes forward. But the current thinking is that the first season would lead up to ARARAT, and then go from there.
Okay.
I can't really talk about it in any detail.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But all I can say is the pilot is not ARARAT.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I mean, with the idea you said it's leading up to ARARAT, does that mean that I don't know how much you can say about this, but does that mean like the season would be kind of like building up to ARARAT, or would it be different stories?
I really don't think I'm supposed to say any more than I've already said.
Gotcha.
Right.
Get you in trouble.
But I will say that the pilot predates ARARAT.
Okay.
And that the intention is to cover the events of ARARAT.
Okay. Wow, that's great news for our group. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And presumably season 2 would be leading up to the Pandora Room, or?
Stop it! You're pressing the guy.
Who knows? Yeah.
I know how sensitive this stuff is.
Let's sell it first, and then we'll see.
Okay. Well, if you need help, we're available. I don't know.
Yeah. If I need to, I'll send you to some break some legs in LA and.
Sure. I worked out in LA as an archaeologist for about 4 months, so I'm sure I've got a lot of pull out there.
Oh, there you go.
Industry.
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting. It's very difficult to get the film and television industry to take the writer of the underlying material seriously enough to let you do this job.
Well, I'm curious about, because you've got multiple screenwriting credits, and
Yep.
so I would assume you've got. I mean, you basically did you write this? You wrote the screenplay for the latest Hellboy movie.
So, I wrote 2 drafts of that script.
Okay.
But
oh, sorry, the audio is cutting out.
okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, try that. I think maybe it might be sound on our end messing up with the system. I'm going to mute our mic real quick.
Okay. So, my friend Andy Cosby, who I've known for many years, wrote the first however many drafts of the script. Then I came in because Mike Mignola wanted to make it sort of more like the way he would have done it. So I came in and did 2 drafts of the script, taking what Andy had done and sort of, I guess you could say, Mignola-izing it. And I did change quite a bit at that point. But that was during a time when, and again, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be public knowledge, but fuck it. That during a time when the thought was still that it might be a continuation of the first 2 movies. And when it seemed like that was definitely not going to happen, they came back to me and said, okay, now it's going to be a reboot, and we need you to revise this and take out anything that suggests it's not a reboot, and make it seem like it's the first of a new sort of series of Hellboy movies. But they wanted it immediately, and I had just rented a house in Maine with my family, and I didn't need it as fast as they said they needed it, because they never do. But they were insistent, and I basically had to bow out and say, I just can't do it for you when you want me to do it for you. We parted on good terms, and I went back to Andy Cosby, and Andy did, as far as I know, like dozens of drafts.
Wow.
Aaron Collette came in and did some drafts on it, and did, but the net result is that only about, I don't know, less than 5% of what's on the screen there came from me.
Okay. Yeah, it's
And any lines that you particularly liked?
That I wrote?
Yeah.
I don't think any of the lines that I wrote that I really liked stayed in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, hey.
So when I say it was very different, I mean it was very different.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was a line in the giant scene that I wrote that's still in there, but I'd have to go back and look through it.
Right. I don't know if you can. I mean, I don't know if you can say if you're happy with the final product.
My feeling about the final product is that there's a lot of great stuff in it, and I think David Harbour was great. Mm-hmm. There are some especially awful effects. Whoever made the decision that the ectoplasm should look like someone's large intestine should never work again. That was terrible. But no, I feel like the biggest problem with that movie, there were 2. One, I thought editing was a disservice to it. I think it could be re-edited with just the footage that's currently in the movie and be a much better movie than it is. and I think that the music choices are dreadful. I think the music, the regular accompaniment music, and also the sort of pop or rock music that's in there, the choices just undo it. Like great moments in the movie are sort of undone by the editing of the music. So that's what sucks is that, again, like if you go back and watch that movie with the sound off, I hesitate to even say that because I thought Harbor was great. You know, so I don't know.
So is that the? Well, moving on from that, I mean, like I say, it seems like you've got enough sort of name recognition in the industry that it might be easier for you, a project that you're associated with, to gain traction than something like Grady Hendrix. We talked to him a while ago. At one point he had like 4 things in production, and then we talked to him right after We Sold Our Souls came out, and he said they'd all died. And obviously Satanic Panic's just coming out, which is great, but and then
I've been in development over the last 20 years. I've been in development dozens of times on film and TV projects, some of them multiple times. You know, Body of Evidence has been developed at least 3 times. So I could go through, and some of those I've written scripts, which is great, but it's very difficult to get the writer of the book to write the script.
Right. That's that seems to be what. I don't know anything about the movie industry, but that seems to be, talking to authors, that's kind of the impression we're getting.
Well, most of the time they assume that you're going to want to stick with exactly what's in the book.
Oh.
And I'm the opposite. I mean, I'm usually the first person to say these are the things right off the bat that need to change.
Oh.
So, you know, but it's interesting. Anyway, so hopefully Ben Walker will happen.
Right.
Nice.
Definitely. Yes, I guess your experience as a screenwriter would probably. No, I mean, obviously you've got an insight into the difference between writing a novel and writing a screenplay.
Well, with Ben Walker, I had to basically invent a TV series from scratch.
Right.
Because it's not just adapting the existing books; it's creating the world around Ben Walker and what would a TV series look like on a week-to-week basis.
Wow. And have you just written the pilot or several episodes?
I've written the pilot, and I'm working on the Bible, which includes sort of an idea of what some of those episodes will be and what some subsequent seasons would be. And
wow, okay,
awesome. That's great.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Another question.
Is it hard to do all that from this area? I thought at some point you'd have to move to LA, or I mean, with this many, so many of your books that have been optioned, everything else, you would think you'd have the pull of LA would try to suck you in.
There have been a couple of times over the years when we were in development on TV stuff where my manager said, "Well, if this happens, you're going to have to move to LA," and the first time we had that conversation, I talked to my wife, and we considered basically me commuting, living out there for 2 weeks, coming home for 4 days, going back out for 2 weeks.
Wow.
At one point, we talked about moving out there if a TV series came off, and then at a certain point, I said, "No, under no circumstances am I going to move out there for this."
Right.
When our kids were a certain age, my daughter only has another 2 years in high school. And so at this point, consider, but I would only do it if I had a need to. And the difference between being here and being there is if I were there, I'd be taking meetings constantly.
Oh yeah.
I'd be going into those sort of pitch meetings and general meetings and all that stuff constantly.
You'd be in the machine.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right.
and I haven't ever really been in that position. And you know, in many ways, I'm happy that I stayed here and just wrote my books.
Mm.
But if this series goes, obviously, I'll have to spend a lot of time in LA.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Huh.
Actually, one question I had is, I guess, similar tangent is I was curious how you started writing or working with Mike Mignola, because I remember I first was introduced to his work in Alpha Flight in, I think, 1985. After he took over from John Byrne, I think, in that series as the artist and writer, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember. But I was, it went back a while. Then I saw him progress through Hellboy and that sort of thing.
So when Hellboy was first published, I was an editor and freelancing. I was an editor and a writer for a magazine called Flux. It didn't last very long, but I interviewed Mike for that magazine. And while I was interviewing him, I said, black and white horror magazines in the 70s, early 80s, that had prose backup stories. They have a Dracula story in the back. And I said, you should do that in the next Hellboy miniseries. And he said, and I suppose you'd want to write it. And I said, well, hell yeah, I'd want to write it. So I sent him my first novel, which came out in 1994. And we got to talking and we got to be friends. And eventually he said, hey, I don't want to do that backup idea. I think that's dumb, but I want to write a full-fledged Hellboy novel. I'd be up for that.
Nice.
That's how Hellboy the Lost Army happened, and I've been working with him ever since. And there's a shit ton of Yola stuff coming. I can't talk about, but
Oh, great. Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
There are a lot of comic book projects coming from us.
Oh, great.
Oh, good, good.
Is it mostly Hellboy or Baltimore? Or I don't know how much you can
That part
say.
where I said I can't talk about it.
Right. So I withdraw the question.
Yeah, thank you.
I ran into Mike Magnolia in a very strange place. I was in the Providence Athenaeum.
Wow.
And the Providence Athenaeum has a fairly new bust of H.P. Lovecraft there, which is really pretty in a grotesque kind of way. And I was looking at the names of all the other people contributed to make that possible, and Mike was a big contributor, to that. And I thought, oh, that's really neat to see him in that place in this library in Providence.
Right, that's very cool.
Yeah. And is that, I guess, just to kind of go back to, is that, I mean, I'm a big Lovecraft fan, and I know, I mean, so we do a lot of Lovecrafty things in this book club. I don't know if he has. I mean, what are your horror influences? I guess is the basic question.
Well, I mean, I don't think you can escape Lovecraft.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think you can have grown up loving the things that I grew up loving and not be influenced by Lovecraft. But I think that it's so much a part of the horror culture now that I don't. It's just like it's part of the air we breathe, it's like saying, are you influenced by Gothic literature? You know what I mean? Like, of course, even people who, if you write horror and you think you're not influenced by Gothic literature, or even if you've never read Lovecraft, if you think you're not influenced by Lovecraft, you are. That said, I devoured Lovecraft in when I was a kid, middle school, high school, early college, but mostly in middle school and high school. And I loved all different kinds of Lovecraft stories. My favorite, I was just talking about this the other day, is a science fiction story called In the Walls of Eryx.
Yes.
Which is, I think, my favorite Lovecraft story, and nobody ever talks about it.
I could buy that.
Yeah, but it's just it's sort of like if Lovecraft and Ray Bradbury wrote an Edgar Allan Poe story together.
Okay.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's a really, anyway, it's a really interesting story.
Yes, definitely.
There's so much in the universe of Baltimore that has, or in Joe Golem that have, particularly Joe Golem, that has Lovecraft influence, and it's definitely in my work. But my biggest influence has always been Stephen King, and always will be. I always say that Stephen King was the narrative voice of my youth. When I think about being a kid, I think about the ending of the movie version of The Body of Stand By Me.
Right.
When Richard Dreyfuss is typing and you hear his voice, I never had any friends later on like I had when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? And
I'll never have that again.
Yeah, so that is the sort of like big influence. So everything else is sort of under that umbrella, Clive Barker, Joe Lansdale, Shirley Jackson, even like Andrew Box, Red a certain age. Just a lot of, as an adult, I think Dennis Lehane, Walter Mosley. These are not necessarily authors you would associate with influencing me, but they are influences on me. Charlene Harris, who's a good friend of mine, the Sookie Stackhouse novels have a flow and an attitude and a humor and character in them that I think is really admirable, and Charlene makes it look simple and easy, and it's the furthest thing from simple and easy to accomplish that. So, yeah. So again, I have a lot, but we can belong, like Robert Stock, fantasy writer, Tim Powers, fantasy writer. I don't know. You have to look around, but Peter Straub.
You've got some books behind you.
Yeah, no, well, those are, my to be read shelf back there.
Oh wow.
Those are all yours. Okay, that's right.
No, those are all. Those are to be read.
Nice.
Go ahead.
I'm curious what your sort of in that vein. What so like what do you consider sort of like the your big, what interests you the most nowadays in the contemporary writers?
Well, again, I read pretty broadly. I don't just read horror. But if we're talking specifically about horror, I should make a list. Obviously, I mean, I love the writers who've broken through in the last few years. I love Paul. He's a good friend. Joe Hill, Josh Mallerman, all really talented writers. But I also feel like, you can't discount people like Theodore Goss and Rachel Otto Deering, who's a good friend of mine who co-edited Hex Life with me, has a story in Hex Life, and she has a story in 10-Word Tragedies, which I also edited with Tim Levin. Rachel's terrific. She wrote this novella called Husk. She's great. God, it's just like I need to make a list. There are so many. John Langford's The Fisherman, which I love.
Oh yeah, that's one of my personal favorites of the last few years.
Yeah, it's a terrific book.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, so again, I mean, they're broadly too. So there are a lot of crime writers that I love. I also read the occasional book club style book, I'll call it. I read a book by Chris Cleave called Everyone Brave is Forgiven that I loved. I love that because it reminds me of a sort of 1940s Hollywood movie, and I love old Hollywood. I love old movies.
Right. Yeah, it's I'm trying to think. Yeah, the Fisherman was great. I love Cabin at the End of the World.
Yeah.
Most recently,
I haven't read Cabin yet. That's the one. I've read Growing Things already, but I haven't read Cabin yet.
Oh, okay, yeah, I haven't read Growing Things yet, but we had Paul here talking to us about Cabin, and it's definitely one of my tops in the last several years. I finished Nathan Ballinger's Wounds this morning, and that was fantastic.
I haven't read Wounds yet, but I've read
North American Lake Monsters.
Yes, thank you. You know, and again, I just sort of bounce around. I don't know if you've ever read Jennifer McMahon, but Jennifer McMahon is terrifically talented.
Oh.
She'll be at the Halloween Book Festival. You should
read her
books. She's
will.
Great. So, you know, again, bouncing around.
Yeah, I've got a to be read stack about that big. It's a lot of it's digital, boy. But like Nadia Bolton, I need to read some of hers. And she's down in D.C. She actually had a book club down in Washington before I moved back up here, and she visited my old book club with the remaining members there and talked to them, and they loved her. It's one of their favorite people now.
Yeah, no, Nadia's great. And you know, Rio Ewers, one of my good friends, is so talented. I think Rio is one author that I would point to and say, and I've been saying this for years, that he's going to break out.
Oh, okay.
It's really difficult to break out in modern publishing, but he's so talented and so passionate about what he does that he's, you know, if you've never read him, he's great.
What's the name?
Again, so we'd have to go back and look. I'd have to make a list, you know.
What's the last name?
Ewers.
Okay.
Youers.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and I'm looking like I don't know. I'd have to. I'll make a list.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, that'd be great for us.
We'll post it.
Yeah. Well, and contribute it.
Doing the Twisted Book of Shadows.
Right.
Was so great because we ended up with 19 stories. I want to say 17 of which were by people I didn't know. And
I meant to ask that because I saw that online. And so you did a call out for submissions from anybody, and you didn't. I mean, while you were reading the stories, you didn't know who the author of the story at the time.
Yeah, so I guess I should explain that. So
that's amazing.
I've always felt like, you know, it's getting harder and harder to sell any anthology. Hex Life was looked at by like 18 publishers before we found a publisher who wanted it. And this is a great fucking book.
Right, you've got some big names behind it.
It is a fantastic anthology, but it was really hard to sell, and it's getting harder and harder to sell them. Even though when you go to a mainstream publisher, you have to go in with a list where at least half a dozen of the people on the list are New York Times bestsellers, and the rest of them are, you know, most of them are names that are familiar or have big Twitter followings or whatever.
Right. King, Straub, Barker, yada yada.
Yeah, so it's getting harder and harder to convince a mainstream publisher to do an anthology, which means that anthology might still be great, but the opportunities for unknown or lesser known writers are almost nil, especially if they want to get paid professional rates.
Right.
So I'd been saying for a long time, and then Jim said we should just do it and not wait anymore. I want to do an anthology where we pay professional rates, and we would not have one single spot in the anthology reserved for marquee names or our friends or writers we thought would bring in readers or anything. No reserved spots whatsoever. And we ended up doing the Book of Shadows, which we did GoFundMe to raise the money. More gets a copy of the digital version. And we had 700 submissions, maybe over 700 submissions, and they all came in blind. So
Wow.
through our friend Matt Bechtel, who did yeoman's work. Matt all of identifying information from the stories and created a spreadsheet. We had an Excel spreadsheet that just had the title of the story. That was it. And we read 700 stories, and we recruited a bunch of other writers and editors who we respected to read along with us, and they were extraordinarily generous to do that. Nadia Vulcan read some. K.L. Pereira, Lee Thomas read them all. A few people did read them all. Anyway, I have to go back and look. And what the point is that we put out the call as loudly and broadly as we could, and as frequently as we could, to say, leading up to it for months, in the month of February, we're going to be reading. We'll be accepting stories, and we tried to get into every corner we could, so that, because the thing is that a lot of times writers of color and LGBT writers and a lot of women who write horror, because they don't necessarily feel like they're noticed by what they would consider sort of the mainstream horror community, which is largely middle-aged white guys. They don't necessarily see the calls for these things, and the editors don't make an effort to broadcast the call so that people who aren't in this same phase or on the same page or reading the same news will see those calls for submissions.
Right.
So we went out as broadly as we could, as loudly as we could. We had no idea. We had no information about the people who submitted the stories. And in the end, we had 10 stories by women and 9 by men. Only 2 people of color in the book, but I don't know. I still don't really know the answer to that question. And as far as the LGBT quotient, I have no idea. You know what I mean? Like
So you got 17 stories that you broke down to 19?
19 stories. And again, the thing is, like, we were not, so I should say, I wanted to get the most diverse spectrum of writers submitting stories, but we were not looking for diverse stories.
I guess you wouldn't know because they're all anonymous.
Right, well, some of the stories, like one of the stories has a main character who is trans.
Okay, gotcha.
But we didn't choose that story because the character is trans. We chose the story because it's a fucking great story.
Right, yeah.
Actually, there might even be 2 stories now that I'm thinking about it. But the one I'm thinking about in particular is absolutely batshit crazy.
My favorite.
It's a story that that I promise you will not forget.
But we all need those. So I mean, are there? So I don't know if you can general. I mean, or be specific about. Was there like at least 1 or 2 authors that you're pretty sure are going to go on to become? I don't know, not household names, but like big deals in the horror field? Do you think many of them will? Or
look, here's what I'll say. We got a lot of shitty stories, but we also got way more decent stories than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, without naming any names, we got a lot of stories by people whose names you would be very familiar with.
Okay.
Like established writers with whom you would be very familiar. So,
I'm assuming not all of those made the cut.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
All right.
So what I'm saying to you is that you may not love all of the stories in this book, but you will remember these stories, and I promise you that the quality of the stories in the Twisted Book of Shadows is far and away higher than not just every small press anthology this is a small press book, but not just every small press anthology you've read in the last 10 years, but most of the anthologies that you've read in the last 10 years.
Wow. Yeah, that seems like a pretty logical way to do that work of.
Well, when you get 700 stories and you pick the top 19 stories,
that's not going to be the top.
We picked the best ones,
Right.
and so like I knew P.D. Kasich personally, and I knew Trisha Wooldridge personally, but I was certainly familiar with Sarah Tanklinger, if that's how you pronounce her name. I'm certainly familiar with Christy DeMeester.
Yeah,
both of them have already sort of made their mark, in horror fiction. The other people who are contributors in the book, the other 15 people, I had literally never. I've seen their names maybe on Facebook, but I didn't know that they were even writers.
Oh.
No offense to those people, but I had no idea who they were.
Oh.
And I'm really happy. I want to say, like, I was happy for the people that I knew. So just the people that, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm curious to see whether, because I remember the first time I read Olivia Llewellyn just a few months ago over the summer, and I was thinking, Jesus, how have I not how have I not absorbed this before? It's incredible. And I'm just curious whether there are writers in this anthology that you had the same kind of feeling toward.
Definitely. And I'm not going to say this story or that story because I don't think it's fair to other writers in the book.
Yeah.
And also because every review of every anthology has favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to prejudice you or anybody else as to which stories are my favorites versus which stories your favorites might be. So that's why
I guess
I will say, though, that Trisha Wooldridge's story is called "At Least the Chickens Are All Right," and
that was implied in a lot of Lovecraft stories, I think.
Yeah. So there, there's I'm just saying that I think that people who read this anthology will come away wishing that there were more like it.
Nice. Cool.
That editors would do this more.
I looked it up. It's I think it was on, I don't know if it's Amazon or what, but it was there was a hardcover and a paperback. Do you know if it's going to be in digital as well?
Yeah, there definitely will be a digital version. Okay. It's just that where Haverhill House is concerned, they're such a small operation that the focus is on making sure that the listings on Amazon get up and they're correct.
Okay.
And so usually it's a couple weeks later he'll put up the listing for the digital.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'll be definitely. Are you going to be? Is it going to be ready for the? I don't remember the release date. Is it going to be at the Halloween?
Yeah, we'll be debuting it at the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival.
Oh, great!
And we'll have a panel discussion about it with a number of the contributors, including again some of the people I'll be meeting them for the first time.
Okay.
So they'll be there signing the book and talking about it at the panel. And we're also doing a Hex Life. We're doing a panel on witchcraft fiction.
Oh, great!
Fiction, and we have half a dozen of the contributors to Hex Life will be there.
Okay, you know if Jennifer's going to that?
Yeah.
Is there? Yeah. We've got a book club member that's very keen on it. So.
Yeah.
So she should be there if she's not. Hey, Chris.
Hey,
Jason.
What's going on? Were you there the whole time?
Yes, I was.
It was just off frame.
You're just being quiet.
I'm just lingering. You have to excuse me. I just worked with like a bunch of preschoolers for like 8 hours, so I'm like, I was just sitting here like enjoying.
So this is similar, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So he's very bloody minded right now. Very horror movie.
Oh, speaking of which, when we're talking about authors, are you a big fan of Chris Jameson? I was just curious.
I am a huge fan of Chris James.
He was just educating us about Chris Jameson.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're done with those books, at least for now. But they're so much fun. Anytime I'd be working on one of them, I'd go down to my wife and if any of our kids who might be home, and I'd just go swim, 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 chomp, chomp, chomp. They're blasts. They're really fun.
I have to get one for my wife. She's from Cape Cod and she's scared to death of sharks.
Well, you have to give the first one then because it's set on Cape Cod.
Cool.
And every year it gets more relevant.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yes, like seal population, shark population, and they're still really rare.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for talking to us. We've had you for an hour. I think it's probably enough of your time.
My pleasure. I'm sure my wife will appreciate seeing my face, so because I hope she will. So happy to do it, and we'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll see you next month up
Awesome.
at the Halloween festival. I think at least most of us will be there.
Awesome. Sounds good.
That is a meetup event for the group. So.
Yeah, it's an official meetup, so like 13 people. So more people than are here will be there.
Excellent. All right.
Great.
Have a good night.
Thanks again. Have a good night.